Hello everyone, welcome back to alkaline hydroxide 784, and today in the history series we'll be doing the content episodes. I actually recorded this once for 30 minutes straight and then I realized I didn't off my fan. Great, good job. But I'll try to make it shorter this time because honestly I don't want to talk for 30 minutes. So the idea behind this is that we'll be using my so-called notes, and the point isn't really to show off my notes or anything. In fact, I don't really want to show you too much of my notes because one, I kind of actually copied a lot of the school notes, especially for the paper one stuff, and I don't really want to just give out the hard work of the teachers just like that. And two, yeah, my notes are quite messy. Like, I took what that wonderful thing that the teachers made and then made it way worse. It looks really messy and not everyone can understand the way I do notes in reality. So yeah, the most I would have probably done is simplified it so it's easier to read and makes it more funny, I guess. So the real point of this is just to show you what you should do when you're doing your notes, like what you should be thinking of or what you will be considering. So in order to do that easily, I'll just talk about the content as well so that you can also understand what I mean when I say make your own notes in the sense like what you can include in it or like you can get some ideas from what I show here, I guess. Actually, this itself isn't very complete. There's quite a few missing stuff. I just realized when I was recording it just now. But I'll show you some other things as well, not just the notes. So yeah. So why did I choose Cuban Missile Crisis for paper 1, team 1? It looked like the most complete one there, but in reality it still isn't complete. So I don't know what I was thinking. But still, actually my best SBQ was not in the Cuban Missile Crisis, but instead in the end of Cold War. Yeah. So let's start, okay? So actually I was just saying the same stuff that was in the notes to some extent. So this time I'll just let you read it yourself. The Cuban Missile Crisis is quite important actually because despite being a pretty small seeming conflict, it was actually a very, very major part of the Cold War, and it had repercussions that lasted for a very, very, very long time, as you can see here. Okay, so let's get into the actual Cuban Missile Crisis. So the first part would be about what happened before the Cuban Missile Crisis and how that impacted the actual crisis in the sense. So one thing to really note is that Cuba is very near the USA and is near enough such that you can pretty much attack the USA with your, missiles and stuff like that. And that's one important point. But apart from that, let's look at the history between US and Cuba before the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay, so in 1823 there was the Monroe Doctrine, and basically this was a way for the US to control Latin America. I'll just put that in a very blunt way. The US wanted to control Latin America, so they had the Monroe Doctrine so that other European people cannot take over Latin America. Simple as that. Okay. And in 1898 they also fought Spain and got rid of them from Latin America and once again got more control over it. So this was just US being US trying to manipulate some people. Yeah. And of course Cuba wasn't exactly happy about it because in these two events it's obvious that the US was just trying to get control over Cuba. Like it may seem like it's trying to save it, but in reality it was just controlling Cuba, like changing who controls Cuba from Spain or whoever else to US. Yeah, so this obviously made Cubans very unhappy because the US was taking away all of their business and all their money, and the Cubans don't get any money, and it was not very nice. And the companies in Cuba were also basically used for US purposes, not really for not really for Cuba itself. And that's why like Che Guevara and Fidel Castro wanted to overthrow this whole thing, and they had this Cuban revolution, and eventually they overthrew Batista, And by the way, it is quite important to note all of these years that you see here, like 1962 and all these other years as well, because if there's any sources that are around that period of time, you can actually identify them based on that context. So if you can recognize what year that is and what event happened close to that particular source, then you can use it to your advantage when you're giving an explanation. As you know, like all the events are kind of interconnected. So if you see a source that happened right before an event, then you can actually connect the source to the event itself. Even though you don't know any event that happened in that exact year, maybe it happened the year before or the year after, then you can use it for that purpose and make your explanation more convincing and use your CK a bit better. Right, so you get the idea lah. The US was just uh, basically on the surface supposedly helping Cuba, but we all know that the US was just trying to get control of Cuba. And the Cubans themselves weren't happy, and Castro had a revolution and managed to overthrow the government there in Cuba. And then he went to do some stuff that the US didn't really like. But the thing is, Castro wasn't a communist. It's kind of a bit like how before the Vietnam War started, Ho Chi Minh actually wasn't really a communist. He was more of a nationalist, and he wanted to actually ask US for help to free Vietnam in a sense. But the US didn't help him. That's why he ended up siding with the communist people. And likewise, Castro actually didn't want to show himself as a communist or anything. He was definitely not communist. He was just a nationalist. And the thing is, despite not being a communist, he was still pretty hated by the US because he wanted to free Cuba, and he wanted some kind of social justice and stuff like that. And that itself was enough to make US not like him. So, oh well. And yeah, Castro at least managed to wrest Cuba away from the US, and the US wasn't happy with it, and their ties got cut in 1961. Okay, and at the same time, since Castro knew that US had this one and only enemy called the USSR, he decided to start trading with the USSR. I'm not sure if this is a good thing or a bad thing, or like what he was thinking, but that is part of his strategy. So he went to the USSR because he needs to trade with someone. Like earlier, the US probably gave Cuba some resources because they were controlling Cuba, but now the US would not trade anything with Cuba. So Cuba went to the USSR to trade instead, and that obviously angered the US big time. And yeah, you can see how the tensions were. So why do you think Castro went to the USSR? Well, yeah, he was probably just trying to take advantage of the Cold War itself. Even though he wasn't really a communist, he just wanted to, annoy the US a bit. And yeah, probably in between 1959 and 1962, who knows how many times the US would have tried to, do stuff to Castro. For example, the Bay of Pigs invasion and stuff like that. Yeah, I'm pretty sure actually all of them failed. 100% failure rate. That is really so sad. Actually, I don't know whether it's supposed to be sad or just funny, but why? Okay. Anyways, so amidst all of this US failure at trying to get back control of Cuba, Castro was, being friends with USSR now. And yeah, so he took advantage of the Cold War, and that is the first part of this whole thing. So the second part is the actual reason why the missiles got into Cuba and what ensued after that. So why did the missiles get into Cuba then? Like Cuba just went to USSR to get some, trade happening. And that is because we have Khrushchev. So one factor is Castro going to Khrushchev. The other factor is Khrushchev accepting the idea of putting missiles in Cuba. So yeah, Castro went to Khrushchev for so-called protection against the US and also to trade with them. So that's one aspect of it. And the other aspect is that Khrushchev wanted to, do something exciting for once. And I'll just quickly go through the reason for that. The first reason was because the USSR was actually lying to the US by saying that they had more weapons, but in reality, it was the complete opposite. and therefore Khrushchev needed to, show off in some way or the other. So that's one reason. The second reason is because he wanted to show off for himself as well. So it's not just for the USSR, but to show off in his own way, because he didn't get a chance to do it. He had actually failed earlier in terms of the Berlin blockade, and the Berlin blockade completely failed, as we all know. The Allies had an airlift, and that's kind of basically ruined the whole Berlin blockade plan. And when Khrushchev told them to just vacate Berlin, that obviously didn't work. So now he wants to use the missiles as a threat, a way to threaten them. Please vacate Berlin, if not I'll do something, that kind of a thing. So that was the second reason. And yeah, and also the third reason, which may not be the most important reason to him personally, but is still a reason, I guess, is to so-called protect Cuba. So because Cuba went to USSR for help, and also US with its failed attempts, actually they didn't really need a reason to protect Cuba in reality, because the US was already helping him protect Cuba by failing big time. But okay, still you have that reason too. And apparently another reason is that Khrushchev couldn't think critically enough before he does things, so he just went straight into it quite hastily. Okay, so the main reason from here is that he was insecure, and he kind of wanted to protect Cuba, and he wanted to get something done in that whole Cold War. He wanted a victory. Right, so they wanted to do this whole thing in secret, because if it wasn't secret, then nothing would actually happen. It wouldn't work. So yeah, the funny thing is, when they went there and all the Russians came out, the Cuban people were quite confused to see a bunch of out of place people just wearing some summer outfits and walking around. It probably looked very, very weird. Okay, anyways. But despite all their attempts to be secret, they were still found out by the US using the U-2 spy planes. And actually, one of those planes were shot down once, and that created a big fuss. Wait, what am I saying? Fuss on its own. That created a big fuss on its own. Right. So yeah, the US was good at was good at spying. At least they were good at one thing. They're good at spying. And they managed to find out about this. Okay, so obviously they kind of freaked out once they found it, because they don't want to get hit by those things, and it is super close to US. So what happened is that they created the so-called alert mode, where they had the 13 days to discuss what they should do. Or at least, yeah, the 13 days where the main part of the thing happened in October 1963. So yeah, they discussed what they should do about it. Should they do an airstrike? Should they do an invasion? Or should they do a naval quarantine / blockade? So the thing is, right, at the very beginning, Kennedy was feeling very irritated about it. Like, he felt betrayed by Khrushchev, because Khrushchev was doing this in complete secrecy. And that was not nice, right? So that's one thing. Another thing was that the US wanted to show Khrushchev that he shouldn't be doing things like that in secret some more. So like he wanted to be quite so Kennedy wanted to be quite aggressive about it, and invade or airstrike or something like that. But he realized that there was quite a bit of problem with doing that, because if you just anyhow go in full on with airstrike, you're gonna end up starting a war, and that is the worst outcome that can happen. Because MAD, you don't want that to happen. And he also basically there's actually one thing here that says problems of installing regime into Cuba. Well, it's kind of pointless, because Cuba already hates the US, so to be honest, Cuba isn't really the best place to try to control anymore. So that's probably one of the reasons. So he isn't that interested in Cuba itself, he just wants to resolve the current situation. And he might have also realized that Khrushchev maybe just wanted to negotiate rather than really do anything violent in reality. As you all know, this is a Cold War, not a hot war. So the Cold War is done using negotiations and, shows like acts of power and stuff like that. and diplomacy, of course. So that's why they decided to do the blockade. Of course, another like the reason why Kennedy came to that conclusion is probably because he had both hawks and doves in his team. So the doves would have convinced him to do something that was less aggressive. So if you don't know what hawks and doves are, the hawks are the people who want to be aggressive, and the doves are the people who don't want to be too aggressive about things and they want to be more diplomatic. And there were both kinds of people in the decision making team, aka the XCOM. And actually, if you get a source on this, right, you can use it to explain this whole scenario. You can use this logic of the hawks and the doves to explain it, and make it have a more meaningful explanation. So yeah, basically the US decided to have a quarantine slash blockade, and that was justified with the so-called reason that you know the US was under threat from the fact that there were all these missiles in Cuba. Another reason was that the USSR was being aggressive, obviously since they did it in secret, they didn't even tell it. And if you just let it go, it will be like appeasement, and we all know that that didn't work out well the last time that happened. And yeah, and furthermore, it was happening on Cuba, which was originally a US controlled thing. Now it's being held by USSR instead, which is very, very not right, like not nice. It's not nice for them. So yeah, there's some evaluation thing going on here, which is, was there really a communist conspiracy in Cuba? No, Cuba doesn't. Cuba itself is probably not communist in reality, because Castro was just using USSR to get some protection. That's all he was really doing. So he's the real winner in this. He gets protection. US stops trying to disturb him for the next don't know how many years, and he basically got what he wanted. So he's the real winner. Okay, never mind. And was the US really acting in interest of Cuba? No, obviously not. The US was just, both US and USSR want stuff for themselves. Like, they're not really that into Cuba's personal interest. In fact, Castro was quite irritated when both the US and USSR came to a deal without even consulting him. So yeah, it was kind of sidelined after this. So what happened after the blockade? The thing is, I forgot to write this, and therefore I will bring you to this website, which you can see the link over here. And basically this website is quite interesting because you can see the days one by one. So if, for example, this started on October 16, 1962. So if you click the 13 days, you can see from 16 all the way until 29, I guess, 28. Yeah, 28. So if you go to October 27, you can actually see the very, very last letter that Khrushchev sent, because last time I looked through all the other letters and they were quite boring. It was basically just Khrushchev saying, oh, don't do a naval blockade, it is what it like impedes on freedom and stuff like that. So you can read that yourself. So very last letter that he wrote, which was after they both sent letters to each other and did all that whole negotiations and stuff, was that he asked the US to remove the Turkey missiles, and also to stop invading Cuba, to never invade Cuba. So yeah, so that's what he asked to Kennedy. And wait, let me see if there's an easier way to, let me see. Right, so this is basically they will remove these, and they'll also like just make a deal in that sense. But the big thing about it was this whole deal was kind of secretive in a way. It wasn't very publicly told out. And that maybe made it seem more like a victory for the US rather than the USSR. So in the end, Khrushchev didn't get to accomplish anything. He just maybe got some missiles out of Turkey, and that was about it. And even after that, there was still many, many more missiles that the US probably had everywhere. So it didn't really make much of a difference to remove it from one country when there were still many other places where they were located. But in contrast, the US actually got a lot out of it because the USSR removed the missiles from the place that was closest to the US, and also they realized that the USSR had not that many missiles in reality. So they ended up breaking through the lie that the USSR was showing, and they realized it. And another thing that happened because of this whole thing was that communication was established. They had a hotline, a telephone line that was created, which would help to pave the way towards more like less confrontational ways of doing things and a bit more diplomatic way of doing things, which maybe might have helped eventually to in the stages where they wanted to end the Cold War, or they wanted to be less war about it in a sense. But at the same time, because of this whole event, the Berlin Wall became a thing. So it both intensified and created the conditions to stop it at the same time. So in a way, the Cold War got intensified because of the Cuban Missile Crisis, as the Berlin Wall was concretized into and put into place for real, because there was like a legit separation. And at the same time, the telephone line kind of gave them the way to do detente later on, or at least it gave a sense of trying to avoid that whole MAD situation at the very least. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope you understand what I've been telling so far. And yeah, before I and yeah, as I mentioned about the Berlin Wall, it was both a it was both a symbol of intensifying of like intensification of the Cold War, as well as a symbol of the end of the Cold War when it was broken down in 1991. So do take note of that. And before I end, I will just tell you a quick fun fact. During the actual blockade, there was one Russian submarine, and in there was three officers, and they were supposed to press this button that tells them if there's going to be a war or not. And two of them decided to press it, but one of them said no, and that saved everyone because no war happened, and there was therefore no MAD. Yay. Okay, so ending on a good note, I hope you find this video useful, and if you did, please press the like button and subscribe. And with that, I would like to say thank you and bye.